the communication director, and her favorite building sets are erector. Now she talks about group language, so let me say, Carrie Poppy's on her way. She'll tell you just what to say. You'll get advice today. Don't you cry no more. Ladies and gentlemen, Carrie Poppy.
Good morning. Hi. I'm Carrie Poppy. I am the Director of Communications for the James Randi Educational Foundation, a group perhaps you've heard of. Can I get the slides? Oh, you can see them. Oh, I just can't see them very well. All right. You can tweet at me during this talk if you like at Carrie Poppy Yes. You can tweet at my show at Oh No Podcast, and you can tweet at the JREF at JREF. Don't tweet at Carrie Poppy. She is an egg, and she doesn't respond to her tweets where I tell her that she's a bad person for taking my name. All right, so I used to be a believer. I was a believer in a lot of things. I was very religious. I practiced alternative medicine. I used energy healing. I once performed an exorcism. I believed I had psychic powers. I pretty much went through every wooey belief you can think of. And I'm going to tell you two of my most profound experiences with belief. And one is when I was really, truly a believer, and one is after I became a skeptic and I started investigating claims from a skeptical point of view. And I want to examine two things. What made me leave a belief? In my case, it was the belief that homeopathy was effective. And what pulled me into a community, a spiritual community in my case, and I'm going to talk about the Mormon Church, which I investigated with my co-host last year. I want to think about how my experience mirrors other believers' experiences and how we can use these lessons to reach out. So, like all great New Age types, I dabbled in pretty much every form of alternative medicine, but one of my favorites was homeopathy. So the first time someone actually told me what homeopathy was, I was completely floored. I felt like I had been duped this whole time to believe that this worked, and it doesn't really. And I thought, okay, I've been suffering from chronic headaches my whole life, and I've been waiting for these things to work for hours and hours, and they usually finally did. Does this mean it had nothing to do with the medicine? I just felt so taken advantage of. But people had actually been telling me this for years. If you're a believer in alternative medicine, you're constantly told that that doesn't have science behind it, but you don't listen. So what is it that made me listen to this person and finally take it seriously? But I know why. It was my boyfriend at the time. His name's Evan. And he said, "Oh my gosh, Carrie, I have to show you this video." Okay, so there's this guy named James Randi, and he did this video about what homeopathy actually is, and it's nuts! So, why did I listen to Evan? Well, Evan was my people. He was a weirdo. So he was totally like me. We shared this sort of common viewpoint. And I mean, look at this guy. He was like me in every way, as you can see. This is him playing a minstrel in a children's show. And he was my in-group. I didn't have to do much to relate to Evan. And so when he came to me with this information, I felt like he's not trying to manipulate me. He's not calling me stupid. He's just like me. So when others were telling me what was wrong with alternative medicine, what I was really looking for was whether they were in-group. I needed to know if they were progressive like me, if they rejected corporate greed when it manipulated people, if they valued health like I did, and if they cared about people more than the bottom line, or if they just dismissed atypical ideas for being atypical. And of course, at the time, I wouldn't have told you that that's what I was looking for, but I don't think I even knew that's what I was listening for. When you're talking to someone, you don't realize you're listening for this in-group language, but most of the time you are. And unless you're a sort of perfect information computing machine, you're probably like me too, at least a little. So let's examine for a second how you feel listening to some thoughts from people who are your in-group versus out-group. So here's our friend Carl Sagan. Walk with those seeking truth, run from those who think they've found it. And contrast that with how you feel just reading a quote from Deepak Chopra. Perhaps the depth of love can be calibrated by the number of different selves that are actively involved in a given relationship. Or how about Julia Sweeney? She says, we find that people today need to satisfy their intellect in addition to their beliefs when traditional religions don't address the issue. And contrast that with how you feel just hearing from our friend Sylvia Browne saying, happiness is a byproduct of having purpose and meaning. It isn't a goal. So if you're like me, you read these quotes and you say, oh, well, I mean, you know, they're all like a little insightful, but even just hearing from Sylvia Browne or Deepak Chopra kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But consider that I actually switched the quotes. It was Deepak Chopra who said, walk with those seeking truth and run from those who think they found it. It was Carl Sagan who said, perhaps the depth of love can be calibrated by the number of different selves that are actively involved in a given relationship. It was Sylvia Browne who said, we find that people today need to satisfy their intellect in addition to their beliefs when traditional religions don't address the issue. And it was Julia Sweeney who said, happiness is a byproduct of having purpose and meaning. It isn't a goal. So it might be that when we listen to these points from other people, we bring in our emotional baggage of what we already think of the speaker. And that's fine. I mean, we can't sit and analyze every single point that a person's making and make sure that they have peer review behind every single statement. We do tend to generalize based on that person's prior opinions, and that's part of being a human being. It's not unreasonable to take that into account. But since we know this about ourselves, how can we use it to reach out to those who aren't already a part of our community? So let's think back to my homeopathy example. Once I'd given up homeopathy for good, I started talking to people about it, and I told pretty much anyone who would listen. So some people were completely shocked to hear what it was all about, and they seemed to genuinely think they shouldn't buy it again. But a lot of people just basically insulted me. They told me I didn't believe in mystery anymore, or I was a cynic, or that we just have to agree to disagree. And they far outnumbered the people who actually took me seriously. And I think that's because as I was reaching out to others, not so well, I had completely forgotten what had persuaded me, or maybe I didn't even know what had persuaded me. So who were the people who listened to me? Well, my friend Claire listened. Claire is my best friend, and you can see from the photo that it wasn't hard for her to consider me in group. She knew about homeopathy, actually. She had known since she was a child that homeopathy was made of these highly dilute substances in water. And she just thought it worked anyway, that water had memory, and that it could cure various ills. So what it took for her was someone who was in group, me, coming to her and saying, well, okay, but Claire, like, you know that I would love this to be true. I mean, I've been taking homeopathy my whole life too, and it would be so great if this medicine that doesn't have any side effects could do what it claims to do, but dude, did you see this James Randi video? Like, it's nuts! She already considered me in group, so it was very easy for her to take me seriously. Now, here's someone who didn't listen to me about homeopathy. I don't want you to, pick on her if you ever find her on the street. So what's interesting about her, I'll call her Lola, and she is a really genuinely sweet person, but she told me to suck it. Because when she told me that she took homeopathy and she was using it for allergies, I just didn't even think about it. I just started telling her like all the reasons that homeopathy is bullshit. Okay, here we go. And I just started listing off point after point, do you know about like cures like? And just, giving her this long, long list of scientific points. I didn't start from a baseline understanding of what her concerns were. I didn't show her I was in group, that we shared our most basic worldviews. I just started talking, assuming that the facts would set her straight. And not only did she not buy it, but she told me that I clearly didn't care whether corporations manipulate people. I obviously don't care if people get sick from medicine. I don't care about a long list of abuses committed in the name of scientific progress. And none of those things are true, but I can't blame Lola, because I hadn't shown her that I was her people before I spoke. She didn't know if we shared common ground. So I do this podcast. It's called Oh No, Ross and Carrie. Stop. Thank you. Thanks. My co-host Ross Blotcher and I, we investigate all sorts of unlikely sounding claims, and we join fringe groups. And we generally put ourselves in the position of the new believer and see what happens behind closed doors. So we've hung out with the Kabbalists. Ross has gotten ear candled. I refused. We hung out with the Sikhs. We got acupunctured. We've been hypnotized. We've overdosed on homeopathic medicine and then chased it with wine. That's how to sugar crash, by the way. We delved into tarot, or tarot if you prefer. We joined the Pan-Africans. We joined a couple creationist groups. We had my dogs psychoanalyzed by a pet psychic. I did the master cleanse. Ross was colon hydrotherapy. We spent 6 months undercover becoming Mormons. And we spent 5 months undercover becoming Raelians, a UFO cult. So our goal has always been to reach beyond the skeptical circle. And of course, it's nice to appeal to skeptics, and it's fun, but preaching to the choir can be just a nice way to make a lot of very pretty masturbation music. So from the beginning, we've asked ourselves what we could do to avoid being pegged as skeptics to believers. And we wanted to help believers and the sort of undeclared to see us as their own in-group, which in a sense we are. We're both former believers. We both would be very happy to adopt these claims if they're true. So here's what we tried. We don't call ourselves skeptics on the show. We never tell anyone that they're wrong. We just ask good questions and see what they have to say to defend their beliefs. And we emphasize our shared history instead of differences in our current perceptions. And it worked. So since we started the show, which is only about 15 months ago now, I think, we've heard from hundreds of listeners, and lots of them are current believers or people leaving their beliefs, people who are questioning what they were taught. And we also hear from people who are kind of on the fence about unfounded claims. And a lot of these people say, I just don't get this anywhere else. You know, I talk to my believing friends, and they just tell me to pray more, or they, you know, if they're into pseudoscience, their friends tell them, well, what we do can't be calibrated by the scientific method, and things like that. We also hear from people who hate the show, of course, people who say we don't give them a fair shake, and that's fair. We have to, at some point, close the investigation and say what we think of it. But it's clear from the feedback we're getting that the overwhelming response from believers is very positive. And it's interesting that so many people say, I don't get this anywhere else. I mean, how is it that no one is just gently talking to them about their beliefs? And I think in a lot of our exchanges with believers, myself included, we tend to just give them this message, well, I care about evidence and you don't seem to. And that just makes them tune out because they think, I do care about evidence, so obviously you don't understand me. Now, of course, I'm not making an argument against aggressive activism. I really believe that movements take all kinds of activists. But my plea here is that when we're talking to our friends and our colleagues one-on-one, and we want to understand their point of view and them to understand ours, that we consider that we're talking to human beings, and human beings are tribal animals. So we need to show one another how we are in their tribe. So what do you do if you have nothing in common with the person you're talking to? Well, I would suggest that you are not the person to outreach to that person, and that's okay. There are other people who can do that. But if you're talking to someone and you think, okay, I'm just not even on the same wavelength as you, then they're feeling the same thing, and they're not going to be able to hear your message. So you might just be digging yourself in a hole. Think about how much it would take for you to take life advice from Sylvia Brown or Deepak Chopra. You know, we'd all like to think, oh, well, if they made their claims really well, maybe I would. But it would be really difficult, right? And few of us have enough time to wade through each claim from beginning to end and make sure that it's scientifically supported. So likewise, if someone sees you as functioning on a completely different wavelength than them, they're probably not going to listen to you. But if you can find that common ground, if you can find a place in yourself that agrees with them, then start there. So for me, now when I talk about homeopathy, I say things like, yeah, you know, I used to take that stuff. It was so reassuring to me that it had no side effects, that it wasn't going to hurt me. It was completely natural. I totally understand why you prefer it. But hey, did you know it's actually not very effective? And using those direct pleas of personal experience, it doesn't take the place of science, but knowing that personal experience is the primary way that people communicate, we ignore that at the expense of science. So, having learned all this from trial and lots of error, this year I tried something I'd never done. I made an outreach video, which was a tall order for me. I barely know what YouTube is. But I wanted to share a personal experience with alternative medicine, and I wanted to use myself as the guinea pig. And I also wanted to see if homeopathy would still have some effect on me, even though I know it's placebo. I was open to the idea that even though I know how it works, it still might have some effect on me. So I got tonsillitis, which I do a few times a year. I really need to get those things out. And I decided that I would try homeopathy out again, and I would document it this time. I wouldn't let it go to waste, and I would try to make an outreach project out of it. And this is what I came up with. Oh. Not that. Oh, Hugo. Hugo, help me. Is Hugo here? Oh, no. Well, it's a great video. It's okay. Here's what happens. So I made this video about me taking homeopathy while I have tonsillitis, and as I increasingly am just getting worse and worse, I finally called poison control and said, hey, you know, I took just slightly too much of this homeopathic medicine, and I was wondering if I should be worried. And the poison control center doctor said, oh no, that stuff is totally bogus. And so I got that on video. It's great, you should see it. And then I called Boiron Homeopathic Medicines, which made my medicine. And I called them every day for about 6 days, and they didn't call back. Finally, they called back, and I got them on tape and said, hey, I'm not seeming to get any better. I feel really, really sick. And I called poison control one day because I took too much of your medicine, and they told me not to worry because it's fake. Do you know anything about that? And the person at Boiron literally read me, you know, a soundbite from her sheet and said, well, homeopathic medicines use dilute substances to cure blah, 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 blah. I said, well, right. But it seems like, you know, after I found out about this, I started looking it up on the internet, and I couldn't find any really reputable studies saying that this works better than placebo. Do you know about that? And she said, well, I think that's everyone's own opinion. So then at the end of the video, I wrote to Boiron and asked for my money back. Oh, do you want to see it? Spoiler. It just says media not found, though. I don't think it's good. No, it's not. See, it's just
It's really awesome.
well, it's on the YouTubes. Oh, so where are you guys all from? Yeah, it just says media not found. See, it's not. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so the good news is I did get my get my money back. They sent me a refund check a few days later, so I didn't line the pockets of Boiron, you'll be happy to know. And you can see that video at youtube.com/onopodcast. So, of course, the video was really popular among skeptics, which is great, but more importantly, it served its purpose. I shared the video with some friends at my former work, and those who used or at least supported homeopathy all had lots of questions, with the exception of one person who said he would still take homeopathy over conventional medicine. Everyone said that they would now question the efficacy of homeopathic medicines, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because I don't say anything about the science in that video except this guy at Poison Control said it's fake. I don't go into like cures like, I don't go into dilution, none of that. It's purely anecdote, and you know, that's the sort of thing that's supposed to make skeptics cringe. But because the science does back my experience up, and because I can use my experience in good conscience, why not appeal to the human side of the issue? You know, it's not hard to find common ground with someone who's coughing and sneezing, because we've all been there. So we know that finding common ground with the person we're reaching out to is important, and we know that telling personal stories tends to be more effective than listing off scientific points. So what else can we do to help people find and want to stick with the critical thinking community? Well, I suggest we be more Mormon. Now, stick with me here. I know it sounds a little weird. Most of us have strong associations with religious and spiritual groups, and many of us would find their outreach tactics manipulative or exploitative. And I certainly wouldn't suggest that we prey on people when they're feeling weak, or that we exploit people's deepest fears, and certainly we shouldn't ever deceive people. But there are a lot of things that religious communities get right, and they're generally masterful at creating and keeping communities of emotional support and getting people to stick with them. And so I spent 6 months undercover in the Mormon Church, as I mentioned. And in that investigation, I learned just how amazing the Mormons in particular were at drawing me into their community, even when I didn't believe a word of their doctrine. They were these incredible outreach experts, and I think we can learn a lot from them. So, first of all, they never made me feel like an outsider. At every class and sermon, I would gently disagree with virtually everything they said. And they would politely tell me things like, you know, my godly role was to create children, and I should just defer all that pesky decision-making to my future husband. And I would tell them, you know, I find that completely opposite my constitution. And they would talk about the sins of homosexuality, and I would tell them I really can't believe that it's a sin to love somebody. I have tattoos, I would wear short skirts, I accidentally drank coffee in their lobby one day. I habitually curse, I don't want children, I confess to not being lifelong chaste, and I told them every week that I still don't consider Joseph Smith a true prophet. But they never once made me feel like an outsider. They invited me to potlucks, they gave me gifts, they would call me to check in, they would offer to take my dogs on walks on particularly long work days. They complimented my intelligence, they praised my dedication, and they told me what a good contribution I would make as a church member. And I think they meant it. We can call that emotional manipulation, but if they genuinely wanted me as part of their community, I think they have every right to say so. And I think that's a testament to something that other communities, and particularly spiritual communities, do right. Sure, they saw the differences between me and my co-host Ross and them, but they valued us uniquely as unique persons. And they pointed out, cleverly but earnestly, where our similarities were. Like us, they cared deeply about social service and charity. They valued study, even if they had different reading material. And they enjoyed long-winded conversations about philosophy and ethics and the root of belief. So it was easy to see us in them because they quickly found themselves in us and let us know. And before we knew it, Ross and I were getting baptized. And there's Ross. Is Ross in the audience? Hey, there's Ross. Not wearing his baptismal robes, what? But it was easy, actually. We didn't have to lie, really, in our baptismal interviews because we meant it. We were really excited for the day to come because it was going to be this lovely, wonderful celebration of the family we'd joined. And, never mind that we were investigating them. And, never mind that we disagreed on fundamental tenets of their religion. We were excited to sing songs and listen to readings, but most of all, we were excited to be invited into their family by our new brothers and sisters. Sorry about my confusing hair color changes. You'll get used to it. Now, if the Mormons, as one example, can win over a couple of diehard skeptics like me and Ross, not to their beliefs per se, but to their community, then I think we, the skeptical community, can do one better, because after all, we have the facts on our side. So I urge everyone here to think about how we can reach out to our in-group who isn't yet in-group. That is, everyone who cares even an iota about facts and about truth. And that might be your neighbor who has a chakra chart on her door, and it might be your staunchly Baptist aunt, and it might be your coworker who takes homeopathy, though please do a better job than I did so you don't get told to suck it. But whatever we do, the last thing we should resort to is making them feel out-group. It feels good for a few minutes, but by and large, it means abandoning all hope for that person in favor of you feeling right now. Truth without compassion makes you right, but it makes you lonely. So when I was confirmed in the Mormon church, this circle of young, handsome men stood around me and put their hands on my head and invited the Holy Spirit to enter my body and give me wisdom I could get nowhere else. And I didn't feel anything supernatural, but I remember how it felt. I remember being surrounded by my people who shared many of my passions, even if I also thought they perpetuated evils and believed lies. How powerful just a little love and compassion and in-group language can be. So when Ross and I told the Mormons we didn't believe in their faith and that we had joined the church as an experiment for a show, they were surprised and they were sad, but they looked us square in the eye and they said, well, it doesn't matter what brought you here. We think God brought you here, but you're always welcome here. And I would hope that the skeptical community would have the same kind of compassion and forgiveness, and that we would be savvy with our words, remembering that seeing yourself in someone else is not just the first step to understanding them, but the first step to them understanding you. And I hope we would always have the courage and the patience and the wisdom to say, you're always welcome here. Thanks.
Carrie Poppy, well said. Communication director, and her favorite building sets are erector. Now she talks about group language, so let me say, Carrie Poppy's on her way. She'll tell you just what to say. You'll get advice today. Don't you cry no more. Ladies and gentlemen, Carrie Poppy.
Good morning. Hi. I'm Carrie Poppy. I am the Director of Communications for the James Randi Educational Foundation, a group perhaps you've heard of. Can I get the slides? I want to think about how my experience mirrors other believers' experiences and how we can use these lessons to reach out. So, like all great New Age types, I dabbled in pretty much every form of alternative medicine, but one of my favorites was homeopathy. So the first time someone actually told me what homeopathy was, I was completely floored. I felt like I had been duped this whole time to believe that this worked, and it doesn't really. And I thought, okay, I've been suffering from chronic headaches my whole life, and I've been waiting for these things to work for hours and hours, and they usually finally did. Does this mean it had nothing? I used energy healing. I once performed an exorcism. I believed I had psychic powers. I pretty much went through every wooey belief you can think of. And I'm going to tell you two of my most profound experiences with belief. And one is when I was really, truly a believer, and one is after I became a skeptic and I started investigating claims from a skeptical point of view. And I want to examine two things. What made me leave a belief? In my case, it was the belief that homeopathy was effective. And what pulled me into a community, a spiritual community in my case. And I'm going to talk about the Mormon Church, which I investigated with my co-host last year. Oh, you can see them. Oh, I just can't see them very well. All right. You can tweet at me during this talk if you like at Carrie Poppy, yes. You can tweet at my show at Ono Podcast, and you can tweet at the JREF at JREF. Don't tweet at Carrie Poppy. She is an egg, and she doesn't respond to her tweets where I tell her that she's a bad person for taking my name. All right, so I used to be a believer. I was a believer in a lot of things. I was very religious. I practiced alternative medicine.